So how did it, well, it allows you to essentially build your profile and your background professionally speaking, right? So it's almost, if you will, a social and electronic version of your resume, if you think about it, really. And then we'll talk about what to include here in a sec, right? But I just kind of wanted to lay some groundwork, talk about what it's for. Not only can you post your resume, so to speak, but it also allows you to look for a job. And so that's the nice thing about it. I personally have found some leads on LinkedIn. I've had some friends get hired on LinkedIn. I've had recruiters contact me on LinkedIn, right? So if you're building your network and your baby the right way, you should not have any issues finding a job, especially in this market, right? Unfortunately for us, we do live in Houston where we have a growing economy. So as long as I've lived here, I've never really been without a job before I started teaching. Okay, so what type of content should I be posting? Well, you want to complete your profile thoroughly and accurately. I'm going to toggle back between screens so you guys can see what I have done. Now, I'm just a study of one, right? So you can take my best practices for what they're worth, with a different grain of salt, right? But I have been pretty successful on LinkedIn myself. So I'm going to go ahead and share my profile with you guys so you can see what I've done. So if you take a look at it, you'll notice the first thing. What do you guys notice about my picture?
It's a smile, it's very professional, it's the point, and it's not like a large
Very
group.
simple.
It's very simple.
It's very simple.
I know that with social media, we're supposed to be a little extra, right? But this is
Everybody got killed here.
yeah. This is a little different, right? This is, you want to get your best foot forward, right? So you always want to make sure that number one, your picture is professional looking, right? And so then you should include your full name, right? If you have a really long name like I do, initials fine. Unless you're my mother and you like to full name me, especially if I'm in trouble, right? I get the whole thing in Spanish. Anyway, so back to LinkedIn, right? The next thing is once you're building your profile, right? You want to make sure that your job title is on display. Here's the thing. So if you're a student, I have mixed feelings about it. I've had students ask me, can I list that I'm a student? Yes, you can. But if you do that, you want to make sure that you're focused on what your studies are. And you want to make sure that you're focused on what your other activities are, right? Because even if you are just working a job to get you through school, that's okay too, right? So I'll tell you, when I first started my LinkedIn, my first job, one of my first jobs is still on there, and I was actually retail associate for T-Mobile. And that's still on there, so mine actually said retail associate at T-Mobile. But now, started from the bottom down here. Just said it. But now it says lecturer, right? And I'm at the University of Houston downtown. So it's very basic and it's to the point. Here's the thing, you only have so many characters to describe yourself. It's not like Twitter. I think Twitter gives you like 140. It's a little bit less than that, right? So you want to make sure that it's to the point, right? And very direct, right? So here's another thing. I had a student last week. I was mentioning the workshop, and she asked me. She said, "Well, mine says freelance bookkeeper. Of course, for privacy's sake, I'm not going to share her name. But she wants to do genetics. What's the problem with that? What's the problem? If she wants to go into genetics, but here she's advertising that she's a freelance bookkeeper.
They don't go together.
Right, they don't go together, right? So you always want to make sure, if we go, let me refer back to our PowerPoints, right? So when we think about what we're posting, right, it should be, not only should it be an accurate representation of your history, but if we go to our next slide, I discussed what is your career angle. So what is it that you want to do? Are you ladies seniors?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So what is y'all's goal, may I ask?
Still unsure.
You're still unsure? Okay, what about yourself?
I want to work in HR management, somewhere in the human resource department.
Okay.
That's my minor.
Are you doing anything HR related right now?
I'm not.
You're not.
I'm not. But I plan on doing it, you know, finding something in the area before I graduate, just to kind of get some type of experience.
Okay. Are you doing any internships right now?
No.
Okay. So yeah, if you don't put job seeker up there. I would say stick with student. Student's probably gonna be the better bet as opposed to job seeker. Are you working right now at all?
Yes.
Okay,
I
good.
work.
So then, yeah, you can keep your current work history on there,
Mhm.
because at least it'll show to other employers that you're still employed, right? But your career objective, you would say, you would actually sort of start, when you list your skill set, you can list that and tailor that towards human resource management.
Okay.
A good idea for LinkedIn too, much like other social networks, you have your homepage, so to speak, and on your homepage, you usually see a bunch of companies on there. And so what I did when I was job searching before I started teaching here, before I had some of my other jobs, I would search for those companies that I wanted to work for. Or I would just go by industry and I started following them and I started, I would actually search for the job openings on LinkedIn too. So that's another nice thing about it. So when we think about our career angle, right, ask yourself, what do you want to achieve with your LinkedIn profile? So then this brings me back to my actual profile, right? So me clicking on it, right, this is where I said it's really important what you put up here where it says your job title, right? Then we'll notice I have my employer on there, and then I also have where I did my formal schooling, right? That's actually where I got my doctorate from. And then I have my location. So that's the first step to building your profile, right? And when we think about our career angle, right? So you should be tailoring your profile to what you hope to achieve. Here's another thing. When we think about our career angle, right? Most of the time, most of the profiles I've seen, a lot of people have a short bio. And so for me, I'm a research-driven person, so I talk about what I've done previously, briefly, an ambitious and driven individual with a background in a variety of roles, which is true. I have a lot of experience, mainly a lot of that comes from corporate America. And so a lot of my students have asked me, well, what if I just work at, because some of them do work at T-Mobile, some of them do work for other companies, but they're in a sales role. I said, that's not bad. I said, you guys, I would not be teaching and doing what I'm doing if I didn't have those jobs. I had a recruiter come talk to my class and she brought up a great point, right? So we're all familiar with Starbucks, right? Yes. So if there's a Starbucks barista out there that's listening right now, you don't just work at Starbucks, you work at Starbucks. You have to own that. That's a big deal. That's a global brand. So when you think about corporate communications, are you ladies, you said HR, right? But what is your actual major?
Interdisciplinary studies, with a minor in HR management.
Okay.
I'm also interdisciplinary studies.
Oh, okay. I'm surprised I don't have any corporate comm majors like I usually do. But that's neither here nor there. But think about that. When we think about some of these actual brands, and maybe we work for these companies without actually realizing how much that actually carries weight, right? You get to say, I worked for a Fortune 500 company. That's pretty cool. So never sell yourself short. So when you're describing yourself, those are things that you want to talk about, right? What are you currently doing and what is your goal? So again, back to career angle, let me refer back to my slide here. Do we want to keep another social network? Or do we want to find others who aspire to the same goals as we do, right? Who's gonna help us get there, right? Who's on our side? And what do I need to do to get to where I want to be? How often am I nurturing these connections? That is so important. So again, when you're thinking about your goal, most of the time you'll include something about what you're currently doing. Back to what I was just saying earlier, right? But I also talk about what I've done. So I'll share with you guys what does mine say. It says, mission and driven individual with a background in variety of roles within corporate America. I am the first in my family with a terminal degree, which I'm a minority and that's a very big deal, being a minority, and Hispanic also. So then I talk about my dissertation, right? So since I'm in academia, right, and if, let's say, God forbid something were to happen with my contract here at UHD, I don't want that to happen, but if it did, a future employer would say, a future school, I should say, would see what my dissertation talked about, right? So I have the title of my study and my background, and then I also kind of give a small snippet of what my study found, which actually, to your point, also I could do HR if I wanted to, because I focused on leadership, right? And that's a big factor of human resources, right? So if somebody in HR was to see my profile, they would say, oh, well, this is what she found. So she must know how to motivate people, right? And then I also talk about my teaching and how much I enjoy it, right? So if you guys have writing samples, that's also a great way to showcase them on your LinkedIn profile. Currently, I only have one publication up. I have a second one coming out in the spring of next year. So that's also another great way to showcase your skill set, right? Because a lot of times, recruiters will be looking and it's just a nice way to showcase yourself, right? I always tell my students, if you're not selling something, what are you selling at the end of the day? Think about it. What are you selling at the end of the day? Yourself.
Oh, yourself. Oh.
You're selling yourself, right? So why not put yourself out there, right? Because what's going to set you apart from the competition? So if I have two equally qualified candidates, who am I going to choose? It comes down to personality, right? It comes down to taking initiative and ownership of what it is that you truly want, right? So again, ask yourself, back to whatever it is that you're selling, what image do I want to convey? What is your brand? I always ask my students, do you have a business card? And I know it sounds really silly, but I do ask them that. Why do I ask them that? Because you never know who you're going to be with. In fact, it's too bad you guys are graduating because it would have been a joy to have you, but I have my students almost in every class do an elevator speech, and they're kind of like, well, why Dr. C? I don't understand. Well, guess what? You never know who's going to be around you, and if you're just so happen to be in an elevator or sitting next to someone that is in your intended career path, guess what? That's your sales pitch. You gotta know how to sell yourself, right? So what is your personal brand? When people see you, what do they see? This brings me back to my profile again. It starts with my picture. Doesn't show a whole lot. I'm just smiling, right? Notice I'm not doing a duck face. I'm not taking a selfie. I'm not out with my friends. I don't have a drink in my hand, which, by the way, your social media should be private, right? You should always be mindful of what you're sharing and how you're sharing it, because here's the thing. Even if your stuff is private, and let's say you post a picture of somebody with a drink in your hand, who's to say somebody won't share it?
That's true.
You never really know who truly has your back. There's only like maybe what, like less than a handful that really do. So just be careful with that. Okay. So does your photo look professional? How does your headline read? Does it effectively describe you? So if we go back to my profile, right? It accurately describes me. I'm showcasing my work. And do I appear well-rounded? That's so important. What do I mean by that? Well, so you guys will see my work history, right? We already covered the actual bio itself. But you also see what I've done, which again, it's a little bit more tailored to academia right now, because that's my current role. So I talk about what I do here at UHD, communication instructor for the Department of Arts and Communication at UHD. And it talks about what I do, motivate students to refine their analytical, argumentative, and communication skills. And what do I do with my department? Well, we talk about curriculum and creating a curriculum and strategies each semester, right? We plan for the future. We're actually in the process of trying to plan for master's degrees, right? Because a lot of our students want to come back, and we're very blessed that they want to come back and study with us personally, right? So what else do I do? We talk about group work, right? What's the main thing with group work? I'm sure you ladies have had some.
Working together. Working
together, right? And that's a big component when we talk about the real world and what that looks like, right? Most of the time, a lot of projects involve teams, right? And that's very important, right? Because you have to know how to talk to a bunch of different people, communicate with a bunch of different people, personality-wise, ethnicity-wise, all that stuff matters, right? But it's bullet pointed and it's very brief and concise, right? We have a small snippet up here, and then I talk about my actual tasks that I do, right? And then I've also included the history of courses that I've taught, right? So if somebody wants to see what I've taught, what my area of expertise is in, it's in all of these things. Now before, when I was only adjunct, it's almost the same. I would say the only difference here is that I've taught a little bit less courses. This semester I've taught a whole slew of new courses, which I've been very fortunate to do. So my skill set expanded. That's really the only difference there. But it's sort of the same, which you guys can see from the layout, it's sort of the same thing. Now, if we go back to my previous jobs, and if I wanted to go back into corporate America at some point, then I would probably tailor my LinkedIn to the corporate world.
Versus teaching.
Right, does that make sense?
Well, I read on a website, I can't remember that each job you apply for, you should kind of alter your resume just a little bit to kind of tailor it to like the description and
That's
things
true,
for
too.
that job.
Right, so here's the thing. So yes, LinkedIn is great. It's a wonderful tool out there. It's sort of, but it's not everything, right? This is where it is important, to your point, to have those tailored resumes that meet the actual specific needs of that organization, right? So if you will, this is just supposed to provide work history, the main goal, right? But if you go back to the top part, you should be talking about what you're currently doing.
How long would you say that summary should be? Like, what's a good?
It just depends, because the thing is you don't want to sell yourself short. I wouldn't say make it a novel, but at the same time you want to, it's a balance. You want to make sure that you're posting enough that you describe yourself in an accurate, well-represented manner, but you also don't want to tell your whole life story. Does that make sense? Right. So I would say about 3 to 4 sentences is probably a good max. The thing is you don't want to leave it blank. Right? There's so many LinkedIn profiles out there that leave it blank. But this is also not the end all be all. This is pretty much just like the gist of LinkedIn, right? There's different ways to structure it. Let's say if you're super industry specific, so for people that are like in art design or graphic design, right? Or what's another good one? So yeah, if you're an artist or if you're a writer, people that are LinkedIn for those reasons probably are going to be a little bit more showcase focused, right? So they're probably going to include a little bit more work samples than what, let's say, what I have up there. So that's pretty much my work history in a nutshell, right? And then here's the thing. Are you ladies actively involved in anything here at UHC? Or maybe in the community? Okay, not a big deal. But here, when you talk about your education, I usually suggest to students to list the classes they've taken. Why would it be a good idea to list the classes you've taken?
To show that you have some type of knowledge. in a
Right,
specific
most of the
area,
time, especially for you
to show
two
you
that are interdisciplinary, that's great. That means that you have a well-rounded background on a variety of different things, right? So then that's sort of a challenge in a good way to you ladies, to sell yourself in a way to a future employer that's going to benefit them. So to your point earlier, yeah, that means that you're going to go back and you're going to tailor that resume to meet their needs. So from what I've learned recently, most of the time employers want to see 10 years worth of work history. If you don't have it, that's okay, but just make sure that you list everything on there. Because if you leave something out, you're submitting a resume to an employer, that becomes a legal document. But if they find that you left something out, well, they may not hire you because technically that would have meant that you falsified a document, right? But just remember, I remember when I was coming out of grad school, my resume was a little bit inconsistent, but in my case I was studying, so I always had to make sure that I knew how to answer that question that came up. Because it will come up, especially if you haven't had a long enough tenure history. What did you do during those times of unemployment, right? And it happens. Sometimes we have life happen, we have family emergencies happen. Sometimes students have to become caretakers for their parents. That's okay, just make sure to speak to it, right? So even in the event that you don't get involved in school, what you can do is you can list your volunteer history. Do you ladies volunteer? Okay.
Normally,
For
normally
class.
there's some type of assignment.
Yeah, but that's not bad, because here's the thing, last thing. So when we think about the image that we want to convey, does your profile convey heart? What do I mean by heart?
maybe something that shows kind of like what you stand for, I guess.
Right, what you stand for. Again, what is your brand, right? People want to know that you're approachable and that you're friendly, right? Nobody, I don't want to say that because that's not professional, right? But I was going to say RBF. I can say RBF without saying what that means, right? But yeah, people don't want to see that sort of stone cold image where you're not approachable. It's like, well, what kind of person am I working with, right? Because they want to see that you're going to fit into the company culture, right? So that's something else to think about. Also, a lot of students, I'm surprised by this because will tell me, I get mixed. They'll say, no, I don't do my research before I go to my interview, or yes, I do, right? So make sure that if you guys do get that phone call, that you do your research, right? Even if it's simple Google search, Google the company. Sometimes you'll find they're publicly traded, sometimes you won't, right? But most of the time, if they're large enough to be publicly traded, most of the time they'll offer really great benefits. What else? Let me see. And it's important to look at their values. You want to make sure that their values align with yours. I have nothing bad to say about my previous employers, nor would I ever do that. But I will say that, and I can't, of course, I have to be thankful for what they provided to me, right? But of course, there's going to be people within the company that are trying to sort of beat the system, right? And sometimes employers will overlook that, sometimes they won't, right? But those are things that you need to think about, right? Do you want to work in that kind of environment? Is that going to be beneficial to you in the future, right? So since you ladies are coming out of school and entering the workforce, or at least going to that next step in your career, you have to ask yourself, is this something that I want to settle for? So if you take that first job out of college, are you going to say yes? Or are you going to maybe hold out for something better? What do you think the answer is?
I think I would say yes.
You'd say yes?
We're the team.
Depends.
Because I have noticed the experience does matter.
It does.
Because I know, people, they have degree, they have, different things, but when it came down to certain jobs, experience did matter. So I would say, because I have my degree, no, I want to wait to get the better job because I don't want to sell myself short.
Sure, exactly.
But to start somewhere, I would like to work and kind of get some type of experience. So when
Right.
I do get the interview that I really want, I can say, well, yes, I have my degree, and I've also did this for the past year also.
Right.
So it's like kind of like a balance in that, I guess.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that happens. So what does this all mean to kind of drive things home? Because I do want to make sure I stop and ask for questions. So let me ask you guys this. LinkedIn aside, because that's a great wonderful tool out there to get yourself publicly visible and searchable by employers, but it still doesn't, I love it so much, but at the same time, we have to remember that there's still a human element involved, right? So, and even that you guys have a LinkedIn, or you're thinking about starting one, or do start one today after you leave this workshop, you have to think about how well am I nurturing these relationships, right? And be sincere about it. Even outside of the classroom, I always tell my students, how often do you keep in touch with people? How often are you just stopping to say hello? How often are you actually asking someone how they're doing? It's so important. I always tell them, look around the classroom, you never know who you're gonna sit next to, right? You don't know who your future boss is. Or maybe a potential coworker, or somebody that's gonna get you where you need to be, right? Because what is it, the law of attraction, what you put out there often comes back in return, right? So yeah, what you put out to the universe, you should receive back. That's the goal in terms of job searching. But what else? So yeah, make sure that you guys network at the end of the day, whether it's on LinkedIn or another capacity. Get plugged into your local community and make sure that you're nurturing those relationships and staying in touch and be sincere about it, right? Because are people gonna notice when you're just out there to kind of get something?
Yes.
They're gonna see right through that, right? especially women, we're like FBI. We can see through that stuff like from the get-go, right? So you always want to make sure that you're, that you're being your best self and putting your best foot forward while you're taking time to nurture those relationships. So that's all I have. Are there any questions?
How often would you say to reach out to people? Because I know I have a LinkedIn, which I need to kind of tweak and perfect it. But I do have recruiters that sometimes contact me regarding like positions. So how often would you say to kind of keep in contact with them and follow up?
You know, I usually, when I'm job searching, I usually follow up on my applications like at least once a week.
Okay.
You don't want to be a stalker about it, right? I had one of my former professors come and speak to one of my classes, and it was so funny because we were talking about this because one of my students asked me, well, how soon do you follow up after the interview? And he was like, well, you don't do it the same day, right? Because what happens, if they're interviewing all day, then they're most likely not going to see your email, right? And it's kind of might seem a little bit too desperate. I don't like to say that word, but it's a little bit too aggressive, shall we say. So usually within 24 to 48 hours after the interview, but just to check in and nurture relationships, I should probably be better about this, and here I am telling you guys to do it. But it depends, right? So if it's a recruiter that I already know that I talk to on the regular, I probably check in about once a week. But if it's just sort of like an acquaintance, I make sure that I go and I like their stuff, or I make sure that if they get a promotion, I congratulate them, or just something to say, hey, I'm still here, I'm checking in, even if it's just like 2 to 3 months. But it goes a long way, right? What else? What other questions do you ladies have? Pretty sure we would have had more students if we got the location correct. What else? What are some things that have come up?
For the description, I've seen some people saying seeking for like a management position, stuff like that. Would you say that's something to stay away from? Or
Yeah, the reason is because it sort of, it doesn't paint you in a negative image, but it also doesn't paint you in the right image, right?
Right.
So in that case, when you're talking about your description, you want to talk about your skill set. You want to talk about what you've already done, right? So even if you have had that customer service job, guess what? Cash handling, that's like a really big deal, right? Somebody trusted you with their assets, which, you know, there are people out there that will steal from a company, right? But that still serves leadership. That still shows that, hey, guess what? You took ownership of something and you're responsible for it. What I usually tell students, I mean, just people that ask me for career advice, it's funny that they come to me for that stuff. And I'm blessed that because I'm just like, guys, I'm just me. I can only share what works for me, right? And hopefully it works for you as well too, right? I'm just study one. But you always want to say that, you always want to remain coachable. You always want to just remain open. What employers want to know is that they can train you. Maybe not brainwash you, but at least that you're coachable, right? Because here's the thing, I'll be honest and I'll share, first thing out of college, I was like, all right, I'm ready to enter the workforce, I got this, I'm gonna be a PR professional. And in some ways I was. When I finished college though, the first time it was right when the economy tanked. So a lot of companies were moving away from PR. Well, that's why I got into sales, because nobody was hiring in PR. But I didn't get the job I necessarily wanted, but I got the job that I needed. Does that make sense? So remain open, remain flexible. And I say that because looking back, it was such a blessing. It taught me so many things. I almost think that people should work in retail or some sort of customer service capacity, just even if it's for a year. Reason being is because you're always happy to do that, right? That's the biggest thing about corporate communications as well, or even for you ladies that are interdisciplinary, right? Because you're always serving people in any capacity, especially in HR. I was in HR briefly. It's a beast. It's very doable, but you're constantly managing people and their emotions, especially. So you gotta be ready for that, right? I would also say a good place to start for people that are wanting to get into HR is start with an HR assistant, because you learn everything about HR, and it changes on the daily sometimes. So you always kind of have to take that best foot forward and kind of think ahead if you can and anticipate needs for people that are in HR. Any other questions? No. What else? Anybody? Me too. But everyone at once.
So let's say I'm currently working in retail.
Uh-huh.
So I kind of want to get away from the retail aspect and kind of find like a more corporate kind of
Like a desk job.
like a desk job. I don't want to say that, but yes. So how would you say that with my experience, how could I ensure, because obviously there are so many other people that have the experience in that specific field, so how could I really sell myself on this to kind of transition to?
That goes back to the question I posed to y'all earlier, where an employer has two qualified candidates, but who are they going to pick? It's going to come down to a personality thing. You sort of have to put your best foot forward, and you have to say, hey, I want this. You have to want it more than the next person. You have to want it more than your competition. And I was actually just sharing with my students the other day. They're like, oh, it's so hard. And I'm like, yeah, it is hard. But that's life, you know, you have to keep going. And so you have to ask yourself, how bad do you want it, right? How much are you willing to do to get that job that you want? And how hard are you willing to work? I'm not saying burn yourself super thin or burn yourself out. I'm not saying that at all, but just be ready to work hard. What sort of retail industry, if you mind me asking?
Sales.
Sales also?
Mm-hmm.
What have you done in your role?
So I actually started as a sales associate, and then
That's great experience. Oh my gosh, like you can sell that so much. Why? Because I've done it.
and then I went up to, I currently have a management position as an assistant manager.
So then what do you want to do in corporate world?
I like working with people, so I was kind of thinking about the HR field, but I'm really good with numbers as well, so maybe something like data, kind of.
So forecasting? A day trader. Because I just came from banking, and that was also very much retail as well, but at the same time I was learning how to build relationships, which I still talk to some of my customers. In fact, one of my customers is my insurance agent.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. Some of my customers have referred me to jobs, or they've referred students to jobs. It's just, I was like, that's just me though. I just like to help people whenever I can, or if I know somebody that can help them get to where they want to be. But the reason why I say banking is because if you're in banking and you want to be a day trader, if you stay within the next 2 years, they'll pay for licensing. So if you wanted to get into stocks and all that, that's a great route to go. And then they'll train you to be knowledgeable about the stock market. If you wanted to do something with numbers and also do with people. Yeah, that's the thing about corporate communications, it's so big. So HR would be a good role too. What's another one? Have you ever thought about accounting?
I thought about it.
Or finance?
I thought about the finance, but I don't know. I feel like it's a very broad kind of area to.
Yeah, and it is. My finance mainly came from lending, the banking world. So, any other last minute questions? I think we're done.
Great. I was watching you from afar. It sounded fine to me.
Do I leave the meeting?
You can leave it, yeah.